Um, yeah, and like you said, obviously there is a lot of information out there for people who maybe, for example, want to know a little bit more about what specifically those cases that you mentioned were and why that ties in with the Black Lives Matter movement. So yes, defunding the police and Black Lives Matter, obviously there is a very strong correlation just because Black Lives Matter, a lot of those key issues were essentially tied to police brutality, right? Or kind of what we
Yeah.
call systemic racism in the police departments and fields. And I also just wanted to make it very clear that obviously, the point isn't, oh, all cops are racist or like all of them are racist. It's that there are those specific instances. Plus, we could redirect that funding to other areas that can better provide for the people who actually need more support. Yes. Um, all right. To kind of talk about potentially the other side of the argument. So if we look at defunding the police, a very common argument against it is, oh, but what if the crime rates go up, right? Or what if, maybe there's a case where we need more police, but we don't have them. So maybe in that regard, what do you think could be a solution to that problem?
So defunding the police doesn't necessarily mean like firing police officers. It's more about the funding and how they're receiving such um, a huge number of funding and investments. So it's not about firing police officers. And so uh, just in response to not having enough police officers, I don't think that would be a problem. And there also have been different studies, I believe, that show that in certain cities or states where police funding has been cut, crime rates have gone down. So like I said before, I strongly suggest just reading different reports. And of course, there are instances where statistics can be slightly manipulated to um, fit one's opinion, but I think just making sure that you're looking at the right sources and doing that research, you can easily find sources that will show that defunding the police um, would be a great solution.
Yes. Yeah, and I think just because there is a lot of information out there, it can be at first a little bit daunting to try and look for, okay, what's actually right, what's the least biased source. But as you kind of look around, I mean, you can most of the sources you can kind of clearly tell whether they have a strong bias or not.
Right.
And yeah, if that's maybe something that's a little bit difficult, I'm sure, like for example, the BBSU sent out an email with sources that people could look at. I think some of the other teachers and other people have also sent out sources, so you can always look at those as well. Um, all right. Also, and that actually ties in with my next question, which was the media's portrayal of Black Lives Matter. And obviously, because the media that we're talking about is probably mostly going to be American, just because that's the American media is kind of the best example of a type of media that's portraying Black Lives Matter. So, do you think that generally speaking, the media's portrayal of Black Lives Matter is more supportive of Black Lives Matter or more against the narrative?
Well, I think that, I mean, it's kind of hard to say like which side is more, but because there are so many different opinions and political beliefs, uh, it I think that it's not like a clear one way or the other, but there has definitely been a lot of criticism of the protests, and just the phrasing of and regarding the different protests, and how even the president has called Black people and thugs, and that's what he calls us. And so I think that there has definitely been a lot of criticism, but I think there's also been some support in the media as well.
Yeah, and I think could be wrong on this, but basically President Trump tried to, I think, label say Black Lives Matter, or either Black Lives Matter or Antifa, as like a terrorist organization or something like
Yeah.
that too. So obviously a lot of um, opposition from the current government, from the current administration, generally speaking. Um, and naturally, the media can't completely avoid criticism for being biased as well, especially a lot of those mainstream media sources we often say is, they're pretty biased um, for whichever side. And so, like you said, the media has a tendency, I feel like, to portray BLM as very aggressive. So,
Mhm.
for example, I searched when I searched BLM up on YouTube, like the first 5 videos were all like, oh, a fight between BLM protesters versus like the police, or like, there was that time when BLM activists took down a statue in Britain, I think, and
Mm,
those kind of flashy, events.
right.
And so, of course, depending on the source, they could portray it in a way that was supportive of BLM or against it. But then either way, it tended to be pretty, dramatic and aggressive, and highlight those aspects of BLM. So, do you think that is something that the media should change, or that is in a way almost inevitable for the media?
Um, I think, like you said, of course, there's always going to be some sort of criticism. But I think that they definitely are focusing on the wrong things. And I think that they should be focusing on the positive change that these protests have brought about, and that will continue to bring about. Um, so yeah, I think that um, focusing on the riots or the looting, you can even see in some videos that it's not the protesters, but it's anti-protesters, I believe, that are like going against the protests and causing these riots and are looting. Um, so yeah, I think that of course it depends on perspective, but they should definitely focus on the more positive change that the protests have brought about.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, I don't think anyone from any of those mainstream media sources are going to be watching this video. But, maybe if you are someone who is thinking of becoming a journalist, right? I think, that is a very important point, and that is very relevant to not just BLM, but to, just issues in general, social issues in general. There is a tendency to focus more on what's happened and what's happening in terms of action, and not so much the results. Um,
Right.
and so I think what I talked to Sid about as well was BLM. There are so many BLM protests. There are so many people who are trying to advocate for BLM in a way that isn't, a protest, like an active protest, like marching or something like that. But then those people are oftentimes ignored or not portrayed basically at all by the media, and it's always those kind of people who are um, actually doing things. So,
Mhm.
right, and so that kind of can shift the idea, the image of BLM in the minds of people who are just watching those media sources. and paint a picture that might be, okay, I'm not sure if that's really a good thing, because if you're looking at, just a bunch of people shouting, it might not seem very relatable. But yeah,
Mhm.
so point is trying to focus more on the positive changes, the positive effects of the BLM movement thus far, which of course there has been a lot. Um, I think just if you really look at all of the things that BLM has achieved, it is in the period of time that was 2020, it is pretty incredible. Um, yeah. All right. Okay. So I think finally, the last question is, so BLM, um, moving forward, you talked about how, of course, we can't say for sure what's going to happen in 2021. And there is um, some uncertainty, especially with all of the other stuff that's going on. But let's say, for example, and this is the same question I asked Sid as his final question, if BLM somehow could achieve everything it wanted to achieve, um, what would that look like as a society?
Hmm. I think that, I mean, I can't say for every different
Right.
aspect of society, but I think that one thing that comes to mind is, for instance, how Black and African Americans have suffered because of COVID. And I think that healthcare would definitely be something that would change, and just making sure that it's accessible and affordable to everyone, because I think um, that is something that is just a human right, being able to have access to good healthcare. And so I think that's one thing that would definitely change and be improved if um, Black Lives Matter did successfully achieve or try to achieve racial inequality and defeat systemic racism. I can't say for every single aspect of
Yeah.
society, of course, but
Yeah. Yeah, I think really, because if we look at, all of the things that BLM is trying to achieve, a lot of them are, what you would, like you said, basic human rights, like the right to, a good slash proper education, to, actually um, to have health care, things like that. And I think, and I hope 2021 will be the year that maybe, even if we don't achieve all of those things, we get much closer to actually achieving all of the things that BLM is trying to achieve.
yeah.
Yes. Okay. So thank you once again for joining the interview. Do you have any last things that you might want to say?
I think, like I mentioned before, really just using that curiosity and being open minded to these different things that maybe you're not really familiar with, and trying to understand why this is happening. And of course, don't be afraid to reach out and talk to people about their different opinions and ideas, or if you have any questions. Um, yeah, thank you for
Yes.
having me.
Yes. Thank you. And that is it for today's interview.